Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I was 16 when I got my first job at a corner shop near my house. It was perfect, just weekend evening shifts, and I could pick up extra hours when other staff needed coverage. The store manager, let's call her Karen, was never around except as a customer. But that was fine since my paychecks came on time, and the assistant manager handled all the scheduling. Everything ran smoothly for about 6 months until our assistant manager left to run another store. The new assistant manager they brought in was a real piece of work. First weekend working together, he barely spoke to me. After closing on Sunday, I tried explaining how we usually handle last-minute shift changes. I explained to him that normally when someone needs coverage last minute, I just clear it with management and the hours get sorted by payroll. He immediately shut that down, insisting that all shift changes must go through him or Karen first. When I asked about early morning emergencies, mentioning how sometimes I get calls at 5 a.m. to cover someone who's sick, he just coldly told me that was their problem and they shouldn't be sick. I should mention I was pretty good at golf back then. I had qualified through local and regional competitions for a huge amateur tournament at St. Andrews, the home of golf. It was scheduled for an upcoming weekend, and I had gotten it approved way in advance. The next weekend was weird. The assistant manager barely spoke to me during both shifts, and he stayed behind after closing both nights. I didn't think much of it at the time. Monday morning, I'm getting ready for school when 4 police officers show up at my door. Next thing I know, I'm in handcuffs being arrested for theft. After hours in a cell, they finally started questioning me. They asked if I knew where the assistant manager was. I told them the last time I saw him was when he stayed behind after closing the night before. That's when they explained that Karen had reported seeing me on CCTV taking the entire week's cash with the assistant manager. I explained that I wasn't even in the office last night and pointed out that I don't have a safe key. Only Karen and the assistant manager do. A few hours later, they checked the CCTV footage and released me. Turns out there was only one person on camera, the assistant manager, and it clearly wasn't me. My mom was furious. We went straight to the store where Karen was meeting with another officer. Karen tried to apologize, saying she had the wrong CCTV file loaded up. Then she had the nerve to tell me that since they were short-staffed now, I'd have to cancel my holiday that weekend. When I expressed disbelief about being expected to work after being wrongfully arrested, she gave me an ultimatum: either work it or look for a new job. I just smiled and told her where she could stick that ultimatum. Had to practically drag my mom out before she went ballistic. I was ready to let it go, but my mom insisted I contact the area manager. They came to meet me at a coffee shop a few weeks later. The area manager asked if I wanted to take this to a tribunal for constructive dismissal. I told him I'd already got a new job and joked that I was more worried about getting that new video game, Steel Battalion, before it sold out. They laughed and told me their investigation found Karen had been negligent in handling both the theft and my situation. Even better, she had been claiming to work the same weekend shifts as me to pad her hours when she was never there. They fired her immediately and opened a fraud investigation. I wrote up a statement right there in the coffee shop. When the area manager came back from a phone call, they had the Steel Battalion game with its massive controller for me. Pretty fair trade, I'd say. The police caught the assistant manager a couple months later trying to buy drugs 200 miles away. Turns out he was a recent ex-con. They only recovered a small amount of the stolen money, but Karen got ordered by the court to repay everything, thousands of pounds, due to her negligence in hiring him without proper checks and falsifying her own work hours. I never planned on becoming a prison warden, but life has a funny way of steering you in unexpected directions. After serving in the military for 8 years, I struggled to find my place in civilian life. The structured environment and sense of purpose I had in the service left a void that was hard to fill. That's when a friend suggested I look into corrections. Starting as a correctional officer, I quickly realized this was where I belonged. The environment demanded the discipline and leadership skills I'd developed in the military, but it also required something more, a deep understanding of human nature and the ability to maintain order while treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. Over 15 years, I worked my way up through every position, from officer to sergeant, then lieutenant, and finally warden. Now, after 5 years running the state prison, I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last week. I was reviewing security protocols in my office when my phone rang. The front desk officer called to inform me about a situation at reception. He explained that a visitor was causing problems and demanding to see me immediately. When I asked for more details, he told me she was complaining about her son's treatment and refusing to leave until she spoke with me personally. I sighed, already knowing this type of visitor. I'd dealt with plenty of concerned family members before, but something in the officer's tone told me this was different. I told him I'd be right there. When I arrived at reception, I immediately spotted her, Karen, as she'd later become known throughout the facility. She had bleached blonde hair piled high on her head, enough makeup for 3 people, and expensive clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. As soon as she saw me, she started complaining about how long she'd been waiting, 20 minutes apparently, and demanded to know if I was the warden. When I confirmed my position and asked how I could help, she launched into a tirade about how disgraceful the place was. She kept asking if I knew who she was, and insisted her son didn't belong here with these criminals. I tried to explain that everyone here had been convicted through due process, but she cut me off before I could finish. She started listing complaints: bad food, small cells, rude guards. When I attempted to address these concerns and asked for specific incidents, she became even more agitated. She started bragging about being friends with a state senator and threatened to have me fired with just one phone call. Other visitors were starting to stare. Some were quietly gathering their belongings and leaving, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. I tried to de-escalate the situation by suggesting we discuss the matter professionally in my office, but this only seemed to anger her more. She started ranting about how there was nothing professional about the facility and accused us all of being corrupt, threatening to expose us. That's when she spotted my desk phone. Before I could react, she lunged forward and grabbed my heavy steel stapler, screaming that if I wouldn't listen to her, maybe this would get my attention. The stapler whizzed past my head, missing me by inches and slamming into the wall behind me. Without hesitation, I pressed the emergency button under my desk and called for security to come to reception. Karen responded to my call for security by mockingly asking if I was calling my thugs, declaring she wasn't afraid of them. 2 guards rushed in within seconds, and when I instructed them to escort her out of the building, she started threatening legal action. The situation took a dangerous turn when one guard reached for her arm. She attempted to grab his holstered weapon. The guard shouted, "Gun!" alerting his colleague, who tackled Karen to the ground while the first secured his weapon. When they handcuffed her, she continued making threats, repeatedly asking if we knew who her husband was. The incident could have ended there, with Karen simply being banned from visiting. But attempting to grab an officer's weapon in a prison? That's a serious felony. The security footage was crystal clear. Karen was arrested and eventually sentenced to 3 years in our women's facility. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Her son was actually due for early release consideration, having shown good behavior and genuine rehabilitation. After his mother's stunt, though, the parole board took a much closer look at his case. They discovered that many of his model prisoner activities were fabricated, with Karen having bribed several lower-level staff members to falsify his records. In the end, not only did Karen serve her full sentence, but her son's sentence was extended by 5 years for conspiracy and fraud. The corrupt staff members were fired and prosecuted. Now, whenever I interview potential new staff members, I use this story as an example of how a simple prison visit can turn into a career-ending disaster if you let yourself be corrupted by entitled people with deep pockets. Karen's designer purse, which she had to surrender, upon her arrest, was auctioned off. The proceeds went to our inmate education program. I hear it funded a full year of GED classes. I've been hesitant to share this story, but after seeing so many posts about entitled relatives, I figured I should contribute my own experience. This happened back in the 90s when I was around 8 years old, and it involves my aunt, who I'll call Karen. My Aunt Karen was always the type who thought the world revolved around her. She had this weird competition going with her sister, my other aunt, who had a daughter with a rare condition that required her to use a wheelchair. Karen would always make snide comments about my cousin, which made family gatherings extremely uncomfortable. She'd even go as far as to tell other relatives that my cousin was faking her condition for attention, which was absolutely ridiculous. That Christmas, my other aunt invited us to dinner. Before we even left our house, Karen had already called my other aunt 3 times to complain about the menu and suggest changes. When my other aunt refused to make separate dishes just for her, Karen spent the next hour ranting about how inconsiderate everyone was. Then she spent hours getting ready, making us arrive an hour late. She had gotten this horrible perm that made her hair look like a pyramid, and her makeup was straight out of an 80s nightmare, blue eyeshadow, and fire engine red lipstick. When we arrived, everyone was already eating. Karen immediately complained about nobody waiting for us. My other aunt simply replied that dinner was scheduled for 5, and since it was almost 6, it was Karen's own fault. To make matters worse, Karen had brought a burnt pie that she insisted everyone try, even though the kitchen was full of perfectly good desserts. After dinner, we moved to the living room for presents. Everyone got hand-knitted socks and some cash. I was actually pretty happy with my $20, but Karen had other plans. She threw the socks on the floor and started whining about what a horrible gift they were. My other aunt tried to shush her, but Karen just kept glaring. She even had the nerve to demand to know how much the other guests had received in their cards. Then came time for my cousin in the wheelchair to open her presents. It was an American Girl doll with a matching wheelchair. Back then, these dolls were every girl's dream, and seeing my cousin's face light up was wonderful. She had been asking for one all year, and my aunt and uncle had saved up specifically to make her Christmas special. Well, it was wonderful until Karen started throwing a tantrum. She began demanding the doll for herself, mentioning how she'd always wanted one despite already owning 2 at home. My cousin's dad tried to make her stop, but Karen just kept screaming that she wanted it. My cousin was holding on to her doll crying while Karen tried grabbing it. The adults got into a heated argument, with Karen demanding the doll while my other aunt told her she was being completely unreasonable about a child's present. My cousin's dad finally stood up and yelled for everyone to be quiet. That's when my other aunt warned us that we'd be kicked out if Karen didn't behave. The other guests were all frozen in shock, their dessert plates forgotten in their laps as they watched this grown woman throw a fit over a child's toy. But Karen wasn't done. When we were getting ready to leave, she suddenly lunged at my cousin. They started having a tug-of-war over the doll, and then the unthinkable happened. My cousin was pulled out of her wheelchair and fell hard on the floor. I remember hearing the terrible thud and everyone gasping in horror. Karen tried running for the door with the stolen doll, shouting at us to hurry up and leave. My cousin's dad caught her before she could escape. That's when Karen showed her true colors, screaming that my cousin didn't deserve the doll and shouldn't have even been born. The room went dead silent except for my cousin's crying. My cousin's dad completely lost it then. He got right in Karen's face and started yelling at her. I'd never seen Karen look scared before, but she did then. She dropped the doll, but not before having one last tantrum. She pushed over the Christmas tree and stormed out, knocking over several presents and breaking some ornaments that had been in the family for generations. When we were leaving, my cousin's dad shouted after us that if Karen ever came near his daughter again, he'd call the police. Karen had to be dragged to the car, all while crying about how unfair everything was and how she wanted that doll. She even tried to claim that my cousin had attacked her first, but everyone had seen what really happened. The aftermath? Karen wasn't invited to any family events for years. She only saw that side of the family again at my cousin's wedding. where she had to sit in the back and wasn't allowed anywhere near the bride. I heard she tried to make a scene at the wedding too, but security was ready for her and escorted her out before she could even start. Apparently, she'd tried to convince the wedding planner that she was the mother of the bride and should be seated at the main table. My cousin became a successful physical therapist, helping kids with similar conditions, while Karen still throws tantrums at family gatherings to this day. She tried the same stunt at Thanksgiving with my cousin's kid's gaming console. She actually tried to stuff it in her purse when she thought no one was looking, claiming that she deserved it more because she could use it properly. Some people never change. What makes it even more ridiculous is that Karen is now in her 50s, but she still acts like a spoiled teenager. She creates fake social media accounts to stalk my cousin's family and leaves nasty comments about them, but everyone knows it's her because she always uses the same phrases about deserving things more. The family has a group chat dedicated to sharing screenshots of her latest drama, which would be funny if it wasn't so sad. After my photography business went under during the economic downturn, I needed something to pay the bills while I built my portfolio back up. The restaurant industry seemed like a good temporary solution. Flexible hours, decent tips, and I could still do photo shoots on the side. 3 months in, and I was already regretting my decision. Don't get me wrong, most days were manageable, but Sundays were absolute hell. The post-church crowd would flood in acting like they owned the place just because they spent an hour pretending to be saints. This particular Sunday started like any other. The restaurant was packed, and I was running between tables trying to keep up with the demands. That's when they walked in. 4 middle-aged women dressed in what looked like their Sunday best, complete with those huge bags that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They were seated in my section, and I approached them with my usual cheerful demeanor. I greeted them warmly and asked if I could get them started with some drinks. They didn't even acknowledge me, continuing their conversation about someone's daughter-in-law, as if I wasn't even there. I waited a moment before trying again, asking if they'd like to start with coffee or perhaps some mimosas. Still nothing but silence. This went on for 20 minutes. Every time I approached the table, they'd act like I was invisible. Finally, one of them acknowledged me, letting out an exasperated sigh and telling me they'd all have coffee with cream. I told them I'd be right back, trying to maintain my professional demeanor. I brought their coffees, each accompanied by our signature tiny metal cream pitchers. When I started taking their food orders, the woman with the most expensive-looking handbag cut me off mid-sentence. She demanded more cream for her coffee in the most condescending tone possible, rolling her eyes before returning to her gossip session. In the kitchen, I was venting to my co-workers while putting in their orders. I told them about how the women had ignored me for 20 minutes and were now demanding more cream like I was their servant. That's when my co-worker had a brilliant idea. She grabbed a shot glass and filled it to the brim with cream. My co-worker suggested giving them exactly what they asked for, more cream. I walked back to their table maintaining my best customer service smile and announced I had brought their cream. The shot glass was so full that it required surgeon-level steadiness to handle. Handbag woman grabbed it impatiently, tilting it toward her coffee cup. That's when physics did its thing. The cream didn't just pour, it cascaded down the side of the shot glass, creating a beautiful white waterfall that ran down her arm, onto the sleeve of her blouse, and all over the table. Her friends gasped. She sat there, cream dripping from her arm, looking absolutely mortified. She couldn't even complain because technically, I'd given her exactly what she'd asked for, more cream. The rest of their meal was surprisingly peaceful. They actually started acknowledging me when I checked on them, and their requests came with please and thank you. When they left, I found a 30% tip on the table, along with a napkin that had "sorry" written on it. I still do photography on the side, and sometimes I wish I had captured that moment, the perfect arc of cream making its way down her fancy outfit. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.